Hey guys, what's up? Welcome to a new video. So this video is going to be about an introduction into Unreal Engine. Unity recently have changed some of the pricing, which you've probably all heard of, and it's upset quite a lot of us. It really doesn't do any favours to the smaller developers, which are going to be the most affected, and as a result, I've heard of a lot of people that are not happy, are looking to move away from Unity. Hopefully, a lot of you decide to come to Unreal. Hopefully that's why you've clicked on this video, because you have. Unreal's a great place to learn. By the way, I've developed in Unity a long time ago. That's what I actually started in. I then moved to Godot, but I actually landed back on Unreal. I say back on Unreal because when Unreal Engine 3 came out, I did have a play around with it. I just did not have a machine capable of running it, so I kind of left that venture, moved towards Unity with it being a bit more lightweight. I'll get into the differences between the engines in just a minute. But I fell in love with Unreal. The main thing for me was the visual scripting system. Now, I know Unity then later developed a visual scripting system, but to be fair, shortly after that came out, I quit Unity. It wasn't for me. That wasn't the only reason I quit, by the way. There was a few things. Version changes. Some of my projects started seeing bugs. They depreciated a few of the things that I quite liked. And they sort of just give up on a few other areas. There were just a few things that I didn't quite like about it. But there were a lot of things that I did like about it. Don't get me wrong, for making 2D games, stuff that run on mobile, for its export options, really good. Like I said, I've not used it for a while now, so whether that's improved or got worse, don't really know. However, we've decided to go with Unreal. Now, whether you've downloaded Unreal already or you haven't, I'd recommend you just go with the newest version, 5.3. Now, you don't necessarily have to worry too much about things being buggy or are they going to release a version and then on the next version they're going to have depreciated or changed loads of things. Unreal's not really like that. Typically, they add and add and add and add and add. If they label something as experimental, which typically sort of stuff that you may want to play around with but isn't sort of the focus of the system. If they label something as experimental, it won't break. They won't necessarily completely remove it. They'll keep it in the plugins as an experimental package. They'll label it as we're not going to work on this. But 99% of the things that you're going to use are going to be there forever. I have projects in Unreal 4, the previous version, that I've upgraded to Unreal 5. Seamless process. It handles that really well and they still work fine. Occasionally there are one or two things which have subtly changed, but they're never game breaking. I've successfully converted a lot of projects, upgraded them to the newer versions and they've worked fine, which I know in Unity hasn't always been the greatest. It's been a bit of a pain point, a bit of a, oh, is it going to work? Is it going to destroy my game? In Unreal, I'm not as scared of that. So there's that thing. Anyway, I don't want to ramble too much on about that too much. You've picked Unreal, hopefully. If you haven't, this video might convince you to. Maybe. Go with Unreal 5. If not, Unreal 4 is absolutely fine. Which version of Unreal 5 doesn't matter a massive amount. I'd recommend just going for 5.3. You may as well. It's the newest one. It comes with everything the previous ones have, plus more. You can see here I've got a couple of versions installed. 4.26 for my Unreal 4 development. I still have a few things in Unreal 4, and I stick around for people that want support in that. But you know, it doesn't really matter. If you're getting started, it doesn't really matter. You can follow an Unreal 4 tutorial in Unreal 5 and it'll probably work absolutely fine. Obviously, if something was developed for 4.2 and something seriously deep has changed in it, it might not work in 5. However, most things do, so don't worry about that too much. Anyway, download 5, and once you've installed it, you will be presented with the projects browser. Now, you'll probably notice when you go to download it, it is big. And I'll explain why. So the difference between Unity and Unreal is Unity is quite lightweight, as we will give you just enough to sort of get started, but when you start needing extra bits, you can bolt them on. I think it's Package Manager from memory. You can add the packages that you need to suit your game. If you don't need it, don't have it. That's that. Unreal, slightly different stance. If there's a chance you need it, we've already got it. It's all developed by Unreal. Everything that you could need to build a game is probably there. Obviously, we do have plugins, we have add-ons. There are pre-built systems that people have added to Unreal, and Unreal is open source, so you can customize the entire engine if you want. However, you would need the expertise to do that, but it's anything you could want, it's probably there. Anyway, that's another benefit of Unreal. I guess it could be a downside as well, because project sizes are a bit bigger, the engine's a little bit bulkier. If you've got lower end hardware, you might struggle to run certain things. But you do have the ability to make the best game possible, in my opinion. I've probably got to say. Anyway, you've got the project browser. Obviously, if you're going to be making a game, you want to go for the game menu, but you've got the ability to work with all the other presets that come with it. I personally didn't like how Unity changed the templates from version to version, like dramatically. Like some of them had like actual templates, and other ones just had like different pipelines. Not a fan of that. So like I went from one version and I could set up an FPS template, and then I went to the next one and it was just, yeah, here's just a universal pipeline, or here's a high definition pipeline. Oh, if you want the FPS, you can get it, but you've got to download it now. I didn't like that. Unreal has pretty much consistently stayed with FPS, third person, top down, and vehicle. There's been a few extras here and there, but them 4 are the main core ones. Now, getting started, I would recommend you just make one of each. Even if you've no intention of making a first-person game at all, I'd just open it anyway. Just have a poke around. You're getting started. You're getting used to the engine. It'd be nice just to see how different things feel, how different things are set up slightly. The actual visual aspects of Unreal as an engine will remain the same, but just how things are set up. Obviously, a first-person system's going to have a camera with maybe some arms, where a third-person template is going to have the camera's going to have a setback from, it's going to be third person. You're going to see a full character model. Top down, point and click, World of Warcraft type thing, vehicle, Gran Turismo, Forza, stuff like that. It's a base for setting those up. What I'm going to do is I'm going to actually set up a first person template. Just to run through some things. So I've selected first person. Obviously you can pick blank, you can just have a blank slate, but if you've got an idea of what you want to work towards, I'd probably pick a template for it. I found when I was a fresh beginner, the blank template was a little bit more daunting because it was blank. There was nothing for me to like mess around with and sort of like, oh, so that does that, and oh, that does that, and oh, okay, I get that. It was just, here's a world, add what you want to it. Well, I don't know what exists yet. I don't know how. I had all these buttons to memorize. I had all these new fields everywhere, and then I've got to figure out, oh, how's this named? Is it add force? Is it go forward? Is it, I'd start with a template, get familiar with the engine, and then work on a blank project and build from the ground up. I think you'd totally benefit from that. Anyway, you've then got some options of how you want to sort of set this up. So you've got Blueprint or C++. Now, I totally recommend 100% just pick Blueprint. You've come from Unity, or you may have come from any other engine, actually, not just Unity, making an assumption there. You might have coded. That's fine. If you're getting used to Unreal, just pick Blueprint for now. If you've ever used a visual scripting system in Unity, this isn't that. It looks the same, but it works completely different. Unity added visual scripting far too late, like far too down the line. The engine was built and then that was kind of like glued onto the side, and yeah, that'll work. Blueprint is the engine. It's one of the core mechanics. It's one of the core things. It's almost as performance reliable as C++. The very up until you start building like massive games, the performance of Blueprints is unimaginably close to C++. It's easier to use. It's good, and if you're a beginner, it's great. C++ in Unreal, kind of difficult to learn. If you've got C++ background, definitely going to help. You just need to then learn all of Unreal's naming conventions. Each type has got sort of prefixes unique to Unreal, so you'll need to learn them. You can add, as the little tooltips suggest there, you can add a blueprint to a C++ project. You can add C++ to a blueprint project. I'd recommend you just stick to Blueprint to start with. It's going to make your life easier. Target platform, desktop or mobile, pretty straightforward. I also say you don't need to necessarily worry about this too much. You probably want to make something that looks great, and then when you go to export it, tell it that your target device is an Android phone, and it will pull your settings down anywhere. Quality, again, maximum or scalable. Visually, not going to make that much difference. Well, it is, but stick with maximum. It's going to look great. And then worry about how you export that later on. Because changing this doesn't necessarily... if you've got an 8K texture and you're exporting to mobile, you're going to run into difficulties. You're going to need to set up sort of like levels of detail for what display, what hardware you've got anyway. You may as well develop it with the best you've got at the moment. That's my opinion. Pick whichever ones you want, but I rarely ever change these, and I've exported stuff to mobile devices and they've been fine. Starter content. This is just a small kit. I say small, it's about 600 meg, or between 6 and 700 meg. It's got textures, materials, props, sort of like doors, lamps, all sorts of like pre-made bits and pieces. It's got particle effects and all sorts of stuff. Just enough to get you going, so you don't have to start looking for assets and stuff like that. There's just enough to keep you going, and it's great. Add the starter content whilst you're getting started, especially while you're trying out these, because if you do want to get adventurous and sort of like add stuff on, you've already got a bundle of stuff to work with. You don't have to worry about scrolling through the marketplace and finding a wood texture. You've probably already got one in your starter content. The good thing is as well, I'll get into this, but the starter content has its own map, which is kind of a portfolio of everything that it has to offer in one place. So you can sort of walk through that world and browse all the things it has to offer. Again, that's another experience. That's something else for you to get familiar with. Because you can click on each individual item in the world, like the flame particle effects. Open it up, see how that works. And you're just going to get familiarised with stuff a lot easier. Anyway, added starter content. I've picked a first person. I'm just going to give it a name of Unity. Hit create. Now, if this is your first time ever running the engine, you'll probably expect the engine to boot up a lot slower. The first time you run it, it sets up a few bits and pieces, but after that it should open relatively quick. I'm going to say it's not as quick as Unity, but again, Unity is a lot lighter weight, whereas Unreal has everything you need in one place, so it's got a bit more to load, so give it a bit of time. Sometimes if you open up complicated maps, you may have downloaded some assets and you might want to open them. You might see down here in the bottom right hand corner compiling shaders. You might just want to let that run, because if you don't, it's going to slow the runtime down a little bit. But obviously, if the shaders and the textures haven't loaded properly, you're going to have things that should have colour are just going to be greyed out and blocky, and you may as well just wait. Providing there's not 20,000 of them compiling, they should disappear pretty quick. So this is it. This is Unreal. So just quickly to start off with some navigation. If you hold right mouse button, you can orbit around, and it orbits around the camera itself. You can move the camera with W, A, S, and D. So it's got a very, I guess, relatable, depending on the games you play, a very relatable look and feel to it. So I'm holding the right mouse button and I can just fly around the scene like I would, maybe not in an FPS game, but it follows a similar movement structure. If you want to go straight up and down, you've got Q and E, which is pretty neat. And also if you want to change the zoom, you've got Z and C. So if you want to sort of, it's field of view really. So Z to increase it and C to minimize it. Yeah, so that threw me then a little bit. I forgot the word. So yeah, I can hold the right mouse button and I can fly around. If it's really too quick, as it's just become, use the middle mouse wheel and just scroll it back. And you can see in the top right hand corner, I was about to point then, but that doesn't make much sense. You can see up here in the top corner, you can see your camera speed. So if I'm holding the right mouse button and I scroll, you can see my mouse speed is changing. So now it's on 7.5, so that's going to be great when you start building worlds. You can move around really quick. But if you want to get some fine detail, you might want to change it to 0.1. I'll scroll a bit closer in so it doesn't feel as turtle mode. But you can scroll out to 0.2 and you can do that fine detail. If you just need to move in up close and just sort of get nice angles, you can do that. That's absolutely fine. But I'll speed that up for now. Maybe not too quick. So you've got that. You can left mouse click as well, and it's kind of like, it's almost like walk through the scene. I'm not too sure how I'd word it, but as I'm moving the mouse forward, it's kind of walking me through the scene, but it does not change your elevation. It doesn't change your elevation, so you'll stay at that elevation. But then again, you can press Q and E and change your elevation as you're doing that, so that's absolutely fine. What other things are there? I think really the main ones you're going to use. If you hold down the Alt key whilst you are right mouse button clicking, you can pan in and out or zoom in and out. I guess it's more of a pan. And if you hold Alt whilst doing the left mouse button, you can kind of orbit around. I wouldn't necessarily say it's the object you've selected. That's probably wrong. It kind of is. It's more of like it's more of like orbit around a point in the distance in the center of the screen rather than orbit around the camera. I guess this is just move on a pivot, and then Alt and left click is more of an orbit. That's probably a fair way of explaining that. But realistically, you're probably going to spend a lot of time just holding right mouse button and sort of like moving around your scene with the W, A, S, and D keys. That's pretty much it. So anyway, that's navigation. I was going to say in a nutshell, but we've covered that pretty deep. That's navigation. Let's talk about some of the stuff around the screen. So you're probably thinking, where are all my files and folders? Now, in Unreal 5, it's all hidden away in the content drawer to give you maximum visibility of everything going on. You can open that up by pressing the content drawer here, or alternatively, you can press Control and Space. Pretty quick key. You can then just click and drag something out of the content browser and add that to your world if you want to. Or alternatively, if you prefer it always to be there, you can press the dock in layout and that'll just pin it at the bottom. That is my personal preference. I prefer this way of working just because the stuff's readily available all the time. Yes, it does sacrifice a bit of screen space. It's the way I've worked for so long, so for me the minimizing's great, but I like knowing my stuff's just ready on hand because I can just drag and drop stuff and change it as you will. Now, similarly to Unity, if you've got stuff down in your file explorer or your content browser in this case, you can just drag and drop them. So I've just gone into the starter content here. I've got some materials and I want to change this to a concrete block or bricks. I can drag that on and it applies. Granted, that hasn't scaled that well, but you'd need to play around with things anyway depending on how the material's set up. So I'll just undo that, but you can just drag and drop stuff to apply it. So that in a sense is very similar, but I think most of them are the same. Yeah, so that's the content browser. Now, the good thing, I think Unity allows you to do this. You can drag and drop this around. So if you actually want to put your content browser up here, for whatever reason you'd want to do that, I wouldn't. You can drag that up there. You can put it anywhere really. You can have it as a whole window if you want to. However, that probably would make things slightly inconvenient. I mean, that wasn't too bad, but I personally wouldn't do that. I'll have that docked back in the window. Oh, I've gone and broke it now. So I'll drag that down back at the bottom and I'll snap that to the bottom. Now, if you want multiple of them, that's fine too. You can go to Window and Content Browser and you can have multiple of them. Apparently, I've already got one open. I'm not too sure where I've put that. So we'll open that back up and we'll snap that at the side. So now I've got them side by side. So I've got my materials and I've got some props. So I can drag them out and change the materials as I want. That's absolutely fine too. Obviously, as you're making these customizations, if you want to save them, just in case something does happen and it resets, when you close Unreal, whatever your last layout was, it will remember that. So don't worry too much about this. But you can go to Window and you can save a layout, and then you can either set it as the default or you can load it every time. But like I said, whatever the previous layout was, it will remain that way. So don't worry too much about that. Whoops. Yep, up at the top left, we've got, obviously, you've got a few menus here. I'd say most of the time you're not really going to click on these menus up at the top. Occasionally you will for bits and pieces, but later down the road you will definitely use these menus. But getting started, you're just going to stick to these few bars around the edge here. Everything that you really need up front is in an accessible area. It's really neat. So there's a few different modes that you can sort of pick from depending on what you're doing. So selection mode is just like your standard mode. I can click on stuff, change it, move it around. I can rotate that. So your shortcut keys, by the way, is E to rotate, R for scale, and W for moving around. That is different from Unity. That did take me a while to remember that. Alternatively, you have got these buttons up at the top which allow you to just do the same thing. So at the moment I'm in sort of like translate mode, which you can see there is in brackets as W. You've got rotate as E, and then you've got scale as R. You've also got a select mode, which is Q, which is simply, I don't want to do any transform or any adjustments to it, but I just want to select it. I guess if you're a bit click happy, this would be a good button for you so you don't accidentally drag it across the map and lose it. I don't really use that. I tend to leave it in transform mode so I can move it around, but that's completely up to you. there's obviously how you move things in the world. When you rotate an object 45 degrees, how that moves in the world is going to be subtly different. So there's a world position and then there's a local position. So as you can see, this block here is absolutely fine. If I hit E and I rotate it and then press W again, you can see I can now move it along the world's axis absolutely fine. However, what if I wanted that sort of translate tool to rotate with the object, so I can then now move it on a 45-degree angle that way. Now, you can see how just then I selected in between the two axes, the X and Y, I could just drag it around, but it doesn't really restrict it to that axis. What you can do is you can change the sort of like the coordinate system to local, and you can see that this gizmo is now adjusted. So now it's adjusted to the local settings. That's quite neat, it's quite useful. It helps you if you're sort of like developing a map. And some people don't know that exists, so that's pretty neat. So I'm going to put that back, and I'm going to change it back to the to world coordinates. There's a few other bits and pieces. You've got like snap settings. This is pretty useful. Some people get hung up on this as like, why can't I sort of finite move stuff? The snap settings are set to 10 units by default. Also, you've got angles, they're set to 10 degrees. And your snapping scale, which to be honest, I don't really adjust that. However, these two are pretty useful. You've also then got other views. If you want to change your views, you can set up a forward display view. It's also adjustable over in the top left. We're in perspective mode. If you want to go to a top view, you can pick that. That defaults to wireframe. If you want to change that to unlit or lit, depending on what you want, you've got some errors here that in this view you can't render the skybox, but that's fine. Whether you want to do that, that's absolutely up to you. We'll change that back to perspective mode. And again, if you want to see multiple views at once, you can click this maximize or restore viewport, and you can see we've got all four here like that. And then again, we can full screen just this perspective view by clicking that back open. Sometimes when I'm setting up worlds, I like a top view and a perspective view at the same time, just so I can sort of put things in the right place. That's pretty useful. I'm pretty certain that it might be under this menu here actually. Under layouts, you can pick a 1 panel, a 2 panel, 4 panel, or all these sort of presets. They're pretty neat. You might want sort of like this 3 panel view, which gives you just enough room to do a bit of everything. So you can do this positioning stuff, and you can see the two wireframe views are synchronized. It doesn't actually synchronize with your perspective view. For obvious reasons, it would be very difficult to align them in that fashion. But I'm pretty certain if we change this to bottom view, then they all become in sync again. So you've got that to play around with if you want. I'm going to set that layout back to, I mean, it was on 4 panel, but I had that maximized. That's all them bits and pieces. Again, that's with views. Again, that all stemmed from modes. We've got different modes. Landscape mode, if you want to create a wide landscape and you want to sort of like morph the environment, if you want to make hills, dig trenches, make bridges, stuff like that, landscape mode's probably the one for you. Foliage, if you want to set up like a paintbrush to paint grass across custom landscapes, foliage. Mesh painting, personally not used, so I don't really want to go into that. There's an option for it. Modeling, really good. I can't remember the name of it in Unity. It might be something like Pro Builder or something like that, but it might be a standard asset now. Modeling in Unreal's really advanced. There's a full modeling system where you've got deforms, meshes. You can mess around with vertexes and all that sort of stuff. It's great. It can be complicated, but it can be simple as well. If you're just chucking shapes in and moving nodes around and splicing and doing Boolean we're getting into modelling here, but it can be nice and advanced. You don't need to go and learn Blender after this. If you've got an interest in modelling, you can just learn the modelling within Unreal. It's pretty neat. Fracture mode, this is pretty cool as well. I don't want to spend too much time, but effectively you can get a solid static mesh, any mesh at all, and break it into chunks. This works hand in hand with the destruction chaos system. If you want to make a wall that explodes and breaks into bricks, you can make that happen with this. You can just quickly, you can see down at the bottom left, I want to go into a brick. I'm going to press new to generate a structure based on this cube. I'm going to create that, and you can see already, because I've selected brick, if I move a bit closer, you can see that it's got an outline of the brick shapes that it's going to fracture this into. Again, if you want a uniform break, you can see it's added that, or clusters. You can mess around with the settings. I've got a video on making explosions and destruction physics. You can check that out if you're interested in that. But essentially, you'd press fracture and you'd have a physics ready object to break. Obviously, then you need to set up forces, but we're getting into things here. Fracture mode, pretty cool. Brush editing, this kind of goes along with modeling, but with a slightly different angle to it. Really, you're going to want to have a play around with this, but don't worry about this too much. You're really going to use this up front. Animation, if you are customizing animations within Unreal, this is the place to do it. I wouldn't say that it gives you as much freedom as Blender. Well, nowhere near as much freedom. But it allows you to create poses and make tweaks and stuff like that when you need it. So like I said, it's got a suite for pretty much anything you might need in game development. We're going to go back to this selection mode, and we're going to talk about a few extra bits. So up at the top, you've got the quick add menu. This is pretty neat as well. Most of the things that you're going to want to just chuck in your scene. So you've got shapes, which are static meshes. If you want cinematic cameras, if you want visual effects, whether that's volumetric clouds or you want a decal, let's just chuck a manhole cover on the ground, which is just a decal, bullet holes on the wall. These are the places that you want to go. You've got all classes, which is kind of just a scroll list of everything you can kind of just chuck in your scene. But also, it doesn't really give you any hints that this is possible. You can just search in this menu too. So if you just want to add a cone, type in cone and it'll just come up. Click on that or drag it and it's in your scene. So you got a cone straight away. So that's the quick add menu, pretty neat. And again, it collects your recently added or recently used. So if you've got a couple of favourite things that you add quite regularly, you can just chuck it in. You've got a blueprint menu. Now, I typically use this to access the level blueprint. Now, that's kind of like if you was to add a script specifically for a map or a scene. That might be how you could compare a level blueprint. It's something that's specific to this map, this level, this scene. And then if you was to create like level 1, level 2, level 3, something that's uniquely different between the levels would go in the level blueprint. That's an oversimplification, but effectively, that might be where you put it. Game mode, again, time trial, deathmatch, search and destroy, stuff like that is a game mode. Game modes, you need a game mode, whether it's just a generic game mode, because then it has what's the game state. Game state is sort of like I'm not going to get into that. It's a data tracker which relies just on that game mode. Which character controller you want to use, which character you want to use as like, I've just pressed play. This is the default character I want to run, is attached to that. And also, obviously, if you do make like a game mode like deathmatch or search and destroy, sort of the unique mechanics behind that particular game mode can be added behind that. So you can close that. You can go into your game mode and you can press edit at any point, open up the blueprint, and this is where you'll start adding your custom code. I'm not going to cover that just yet, but this is where it is. You've got a cinematic menu. Well, it used to be kind of level sequence is kind of like how you rig up animations and sort of automations within your scene. If you add a level sequence, once you do it, it'll say create a new one, add that. You'll get this sequence bar, and if you want this cube, for example, to kind of like move backwards and forwards, you can do that within the level sequencer. You can also create a custom script or a blueprint for the cube to do that anywhere. There are multiple ways of doing it. It depends on the sort of long-term goal of that. But level sequencer, you can set up sort of automations. Because I've selected that cube in the world, if I go to add track and actor to sequence, it's already put the cube I've selected as, is it this one you want to add? If not, anything else from my scene I can pick. And then once you've added that, you can say, right, I want to transform the location, and it's a time frame. I don't think that's utilised that. It is utilised quite a lot, but I don't think it's talked about as much as it can be important. So that's pretty neat. So anyway, I'm going to close the sequencer for now. We've got that. You've got your play button, press play, you jump in the game. You can click these three dots and change how that appears. Now, just a quick note that if you're in the main map, which you can see I'm up at the top, the main map, it's typically got this little yellow icon to suggest that. When you press play, you will play within this window. If you was to open up another sort of panel, and that is not the greatest to open, I'll show you why in just a minute. I will open up this fan blueprint. If I press play here, it will open up what's called a pie window, and effectively this is just a standalone sort of application running a preview for your game. If you want that to always happen, you can select here new editor window, a pie, and it will always open a pie for you every time if that's what you want to do. I typically use selected viewport because if I'm in here I may as well. Once you're in the game, you can do certain things like pause, which will pause the game. No sort of like scripts will continue to run. Your update function, or in Blueprint it's called tick, would cease to run. So things that would run on a regular basis would just freeze, as you'd probably expect. You've got stop, which takes you back to not being running. And you've also got eject. Now, eject is pretty neat because at the moment my character is possessed, I am in possession of the character. I am controlling the character. But if I don't want to exit the game world and I just want to sort of fly around as a free camera to investigate how I'm interacting with the world, you can do that by pressing Shift and F1, and that gives you sort of freedom of your mouse. My mouse is no longer locked to that window. I can then press eject and it detaches me from my character, and you can see in the awkward stance that it's left me in, that is my character in effect, and I'm free to fly around the world and see how the game is functioning. Now, I'm going to try something. I'm going to pick up this weapon, and all the blue, just so you're aware, all the blue objects in this particular template have physics enabled. So if you shoot something, and I do apologise if that was extremely loud, I'm not sure if I've lowered the volume on this recording, but if I was to shoot and quickly eject, there's a good chance, I probably wasn't quick enough, there's a good chance that I would see that bullet rolling around. It doesn't freeze the game, it doesn't pause the game, like everything still simulates. If you had moving parts, you'd see the moving parts. So you can see though that the sort of like idle breathing animation of my gun is still active. So it gives you that freedom. Now there is a shortcut key as well to this. I think it is... I might be wrong. Nope, it's not that. I will try and find that out and I'll put it down below. There is a shortcut key for that, which allows you to move around unyielded, but it doesn't really matter. You've got the eject button up at the top, and when you press play, it typically comes up there in the top left hand corner. Press shift and F1 for mouse cursor, shift and F1, and it gives you your mouse back. So anyway, that's that. Again, then platforms, you can launch directly onto a device if you want to. Just be aware, it's not as streamlined as Unity. I do have to applaud Unity for this. You could set up debugging on your Android phone, for example, press play, and it would just stream a version of your game onto your phone. You can test it there and then. It is not that smooth on Unreal, unfortunately. However, it has improved massively. Anyway, you can pick which platform you want to run. It'll do a compile routine, and then it'll launch onto the device. The setup is a little bit more involved. It's kind of plug and play on Unity, but again, you can set up a device, you can run it virtually, and it functions pretty much the same. But that's available for you there. You've got some additional settings up in the top corner. World settings, project settings, plugins. They're also available up in the edit window. If you want to change an editor preference, one thing that I typically always change is where new windows open to. So asset editor open location, default I always set to main window. What that does is when you open something, it will always tag it onto the top as a new tab, rather than opening it up as a new window like that. That's one thing that I always change. And also, if you don't like the dark mode, which has come default, you're stuck with it. That's the only option. With that theme there being a drop down menu, I expected to see something different, but I guess you're stuck with it. I like it. It's nice. It suits Unreal. Project settings, obviously you can go in here and you can set up the name, the icon of all your files, company name, blah blah blah, terms of service and all that sort of stuff. You can then change sort of maps and modes, what you want your default map to be when you first start the game, and some other things, whether it's got split screen and all that sort of stuff. You can get into that in a later date, don't worry about it too much. So you've got some navigation, you've got some bits and pieces. Now on the right hand side you've got your hierarchy and you've got the details that are responsible for the items you've selected. I've just noticed the time, it's almost an hour. I'm going to be speeding things up a little bit. If you're still awake and still here, thank you, I appreciate that. My throat is killing, I've never spoke so much in my life, but you're holding on in there. Thank you very much. I guess this isn't an introduction, it's a overkill version. Anyway. You've got the outliner. The outliner is anything that is within your scene, anything that is within this world that you can select will be in this outliner somewhere. You can drag that down and make that bigger. If you want, drag your details up to the top so you can see everything in your outliner a bit easier. So we'll select this cube and we can find it here. One other quick thing as well, you can do a focus view. I know people use this quite a lot. If I want to select this cylinder and I want to get it focused, with my mouse over the viewport, hit F and it'll snap you to it. Ideally, not in the most elegant way, but if I pick that over there and press F, it'll chuck me into it. So there's a shortcut key for you, focus, F. But anyway, if I want to manipulate this cube in some way, I can have that selected and go to the details panel. This contains... This is almost similar to Unity's property panel, except where you can add scripts and add other functionality. It isn't quite the same where when you scroll down you can add new stuff. It's not quite the same. You can select the object and add other bits and pieces to it. Like I can randomly chuck a sphere in here, which is actually inside this cube. You can do that. I wouldn't recommend it, but if you need to, you can do that. That's absolutely fine. If you're going to go wacky, I'd probably recommend setting up a blueprint, but if it's just one or two things, it may not be totally necessary. I'll get into that in just a minute. Underneath, you've got all the settings, but if you want to just be specific to physics, only show me physics related things. If you only want rendering related things, whether it's visible or not, stuff like that, they're all here. I typically have all selected, and after a while you just get used to where things are and you can just change the things you need. Visible, is it hidden in the game but not hidden in the editor, stuff like that. That's pretty useful for things that you may want to be visible at a later date. Yeah, I can't think of it off the top of my head. Obviously, this is a static mesh object. If you want to just change this to something else on the fly, you can change that to a chair. Obviously, it's now complaining to me that the material's a little bit different. But you can see it's worked. I've changed the mesh to something else, and if I want to change the chair material to a chrome ball, I can do that. Obviously, it's going to take a few seconds just to render, because you might not know, but Unreal's pretty good with its lighting. It's got dynamic lighting. It's got something called Lumen, which bounces light from all over the place. It's pretty much ray tracing at this point. Obviously, this mesh is not suited for this chair, so it looks trash. But obviously, if it did, it'd calculate that nicely for you. Let's put that back to chair, and actually let's change that back to chamfer chair, chamfer cube, and what the hell, we'll leave the material like that. It's not an issue. Physics, like I said, this object is got physics enabled. All objects have the ability to be physics objects. Anything that's like a static mesh can typically become a physics object. You can deactivate that by unticking simulate physics, and this will no longer move if I try and shoot it. It won't do anything, but the blue ones underneath will. However, it's not going to fall because there's no physics being calculated on it. So we can set that back. You can then go through and set up all the different sort of features behind physics. Collisions, obviously by default static meshes have collisions set up. If you want to change it, the easiest way is the presets are really good in this. Block all, dynamic, overlap, everything, no collision at all. If you don't want collision, just set it to no collision. But the profiles there are ready for you. Lighting, do I cast shadows, do I not cast shadows, do I want to go into some advanced stuff? All the details of what could be is there. If you want to make something really wild and you want to sort of like add scripts to it and stuff like that, that's when you're going to need to convert it into what's called a blueprint. Blueprints, to be honest, could be a part 2, but I'll try and skim over it. Blueprints are your scripts. This is how you customize things. This is how you set up automations. This is how you set up interactions, events. I want this to do something in the world. They don't need to have scripts. You can just set up complicated multiple meshes and do whatever. But typically you're going to have some form of functionality, probably. To do that, if it's an item that's already in the world, like this cube, you can click on this little button here and convert this into a reusable blueprint. This will pop up and it's like, alright, well this was a mesh. Do you want to keep it a mesh or do you want to make it something else? And then what name do you want to give it? I'm not going to change anything. Hit select, and you can see here that we're in this new window now. This is effectively the... I've got to probably clarify this. Blueprint itself is... A blueprint is probably comparable to prefabs. It's a collection of components which have varied functionality. Where you can add a script, it's kind of built in. We have the event graph, which is the visual scripting system. Viewport, we have a construction script, which is kind of like always run in a sense. This has a niche use case. Viewport, you can see the hierarchy of your components. So this is where you might want to add audio to it. You might want to add a light to it, and then move that light out. These are all now sort of children of the mesh. You can rearrange these if you want. Given this particular example where I've converted it, changing it's not actually an option. Underneath, under my blueprint, you've got the things related to the event graph. So on the event graph, we've got some sort of, they're grayed out because they're like, you may want to use these, and you probably will. Event begin play. So from my memory in Unity, I'm sorry I keep rubbing my nose. I'm a little bit ill at the moment, and my nose is starting to run, so I apologize for that. In Unity, you've got, I think, start and update. Start is effectively event begin play. When I press the play button at the top, run this. An event tick is update. Every frame of the game, run the tick. This event action begin overlap is just some additional functionality which you'll cover when you need it. So don't worry about that. So on the left hand side, you can see now that I've deleted the actor overlap. It's now disappeared because that event no longer exists. This is just a breakdown of all the events that can be triggered within your blueprint or script. So this entire thing itself is a blueprint. And I guess the script again itself is also a blueprint too. Yeah, not too sure how to sort of break that down, but you'll become familiar with it. Construction script again is kind of like things that you just want to run all the time that are not going to be affected by conditions really. Whether you're developing something and you just want it to be simulating physics temporarily, you can chuck it in here and then remove that script afterwards if you'd like. Variables and macros. So macros are things that you're probably familiar with macros. They're things that you can make which are just like the mini scripts on their own that, I don't know, maybe will format time for you. So you can input sort of just a float value and it'll spit out a formatted time code for you instead, and then you can display that as a text. You can make that as a macro and then you can just drag and drop that in at any point you want. They're fully customizable with inputs and outputs. Not going to get into it too much, but yeah. Variables, basically anything that stores data in your scene, which typically the stuff that you add with data behind it will be a variable. So you can see that the point light is a variable because we can change the intensity, the color, all the data behind that, how far it reaches, does it cast shadows. Audio, what audio to play, what volume is it going to play, all that's accessible. If you want to sort of start building a blueprint, you need to decide, do you want it to do it at the start or do you want it to do it constantly? One thing I will say about, one sec, sorry. One thing I will say about tick is, if you put a lot of stuff in your update function or your tick function, eventually it is going to start affecting performance. I would probably keep tick to physics related things, but when you're starting, don't worry about it too much. As your project gets larger and larger, you probably want to consider looking at better ways of presenting your script or your blueprint that don't rely as much on tick. Stuff like events and loops are much better to use than the tick all the time. I've seen games that have hundreds of nodes coming off a tick, and it's quite messy, to be honest. Anyway, that's another story. Don't worry about that when you're getting started, but be aware of it as you start getting down the road of development, that the tick is not the most efficient thing to put everything on. If you want to use any of the data that's behind these point lights, you can just grab the component and chuck it down. Alternatively, you can also grab the variable, and you can, here when you grab the variable, you get the option to get or set. If you want to set the point light and change it to a different actor, you can do, but you're not likely to do that in most cases. More than likely, you want to get it. I've got the same thing 3 times here. Don't worry about it. I'm just going to delete them, but they're all the same thing. If I drag off this, I now have the ability to manipulate any of the data behind it. If you're not familiar with the data, which you shouldn't be at the beginning, you can click on point light, and anything you see in this details panel here, like intensity, color, whether it's visible or not, is all accessible. So if you want to run a script, which this isn't going to work because I don't have a player controller. Now, I don't mean a physical controller. I mean an in-game listener, which is listening for me pressing keys for this object. I can make a video about that if need be. Essentially, I can't press a key on the keyboard and get this to do something straight away. I have to give it a controller and say listen for key inputs. Anyway, if I wanted to press a key and turn this off, I could say set visibility, for example, or I could just type in vis and it'll probably come up. It'll probably come up because we've got context sensitivity. The fact that I've dragged off a light tells Unreal I'm probably going to want to do something to this light. So I'm only going to display functions which are appropriate for this light. If you want to add the light to something that's not that conventional but works, where you might need to convert the data type or something like that, you might need to turn off context sensitivity to find the option. That doesn't happen that often, but it does come up. So be aware, if you can't find something that you've seen on a tutorial or something, you may need to remove context sensitivity. Most people would tell you that on a video if it's out of the norm. Anyway, we can set the visibility, and just for convenience sake, it's chucked in a point light reference just so it makes sure that you've got it. We're going to set that visibility when the event begin play happens, and we're going to set it to its visibility as on. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy that by either Control C and Control V, or press Control D to duplicate. I'm going to add another one, and I'm going to say the new visibility wants to be off or false, not true. But I want to do that after a set period of time. I'm going to add a delay. I think in Unity that was a wait. And then my duration's going to be 5 seconds. So obviously the light was already on, but I'm just going to make sure it definitely is by setting the visibility to yes. And you can see how this can come together. This is a script effectively of when I press start, make sure the visibility of my point light is on. After 5 seconds, turn it off. Let's hit compile. Is it going to be visible? So yeah, it should be brighter on top, I guess. We're going to hit play. We're going to look at our cube, and then after 5 seconds, hopefully the light goes off. That's a script in a nutshell. Obviously, it can be extremely more complicated than that, but I don't want to go into it because it's not that video. But Blueprint in a nutshell: right click, add the bits and pieces that you want. Obviously, look online, look at my channel. I've got plenty of videos on bits and pieces. There's tons of videos online. Get familiar with Blueprint, and this is going to be the core of it. And realistically, I think that's the majority of things that you're going to want to know up front. We're just creeping up to an hour, so I'm going to stop talking. I need to rest my throat. I have not talked so much ever before on a video. This was an introduction and a half. I hoped it helped. I hope it convinces you to stick with Unreal. And yeah, I hope it was helpful. If it was, please consider giving me a like. Comment down below. If you're new to the channel, which you probably are, there's a Discord channel down below, very active. Any questions, chuck them in the Discord channel. I'm very active on that. I'll probably get back to you within a day at the latest. Alternatively, just pop a comment down below. I reply to all of those too. And subscribe, I guess. Yeah, if you've stuck around this far, you may as well. You've watched an hour of me already. Why not subscribe and see some more? That's it. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in another video. Cheers.